Help is just a click away with Shoreside Therapy's free 15-minute consultation. At Shoreside Therapies, they offer personalized therapy services that combine evidence-based techniques with genuine care and understanding. They provide various solutions to make the therapy process more accessible, including virtual appointments and assistance with insurance benefits. Their team of licensed therapists is dedicated to helping you build resilience and confidence while navigating life's challenges. Join Shoreside Therapies on your journey to finding inner peace and happiness. Go to shoresidetherapies.com for a free 15-minute consultation and discover the benefits of counseling. At Shoreside Therapies, again, shoresidetherapies.com, and schedule your free consultation right online. I'm Lori Groh, your host, mental health therapist, and practice owner. Each month, we showcase a central theme and provide weekly practical hacks, inspiring interviews, and valuable advice from wellness professionals. Our aim is to help streamline your wellness and mental health journey. Hi, welcome to the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Lori Groh. Today we have Susan Beth Miller. Susan lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where she works as a clinical psychologist. She's the author of 3 novels, including Indigo Rose and A Beautiful Land, and 5 psychology books, including When Parents Have Problems, The Shame Experience, Shame in Context, She Loves the Natural World, Original Ideas, Art, Democracy, and Dogs of All Breeds. Her new young adult novel is, By the Way, I Love You. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, Lori. So nice to be here.
I'm really excited to talk with you. The great thing about talking with you, Susan, is we both do work with clients in the therapy realm. I want to hear a little bit about that as well. But we're in a yin and the yang. You're a writer and I'm a reader. So
I'm a reader as well.
Yeah.
I'm a reader as well. I think most writers are also readers. So.
Yes, that's true. I love that you've written so many books. I do want to dive into that, but I want to hear a little bit about when you decided to transition from writing psychology books to writing novels. In some ways, it makes sense as a therapist.
I actually started with fiction at quite a young age. And even before I had much idea what a psychologist was, I was interested in writing fiction. The psychology writing came later, but the fiction was always in my blood. For whatever reason, reaching the point that I hoped to reach in fiction writing was a steeper hill to climb for me than with the psychology writing. So I think that's why I've circled back to it now later in my career, feeling like, okay, I said some of the things I wanted to say as a psychologist in those books, but I still have much to learn and accomplish as a fiction writer. So I'm back to laboring with that again.
Yes. Wow, that's really cool. So tell me a little bit about how they link for you. How does your work in psychology link with your writing?
Yeah, I have thought about that and thought that it's probably not an accident that I'm not a poet. I'm not a poet. And I think the big difference between poetry, or at least one important difference between poetry and, say, writing a short story or a novel is character, right? That structure, this sort of armature of the novel really is the characters, those individual human beings through which a story is told, or you are telling their story. And so I think that's the big bridge that I see to being a therapist, because of course, as a therapist, you have the privilege of just hearing people's stories, not just what happens to them, but also just who they are, what their facial expressions are like, and how they use their voice and their dialect. And so you learn all these of a person, in addition to the particular episodes that make up our own narrative. The therapist's interest in character, and I think the novelist's interest in character, is a thread between the two.
Yeah, I definitely could see that. I know myself when I'm listening to reading books, I do sometimes go into that space of would think this or do this. But I would imagine that would give you definitely an advantage as a writer to, like you said, have the gift of being in the room with somebody, sharing some of those internal thoughts, sharing how they connect to their feelings, how that connects to their behaviors, and seeing somebody as a whole picture, at least as far as we can and as far as they will allow us to. I would imagine that that ability then can translate.
I think that's true. And sometimes I step back a little bit and think about the fact that not everybody actually gets to learn about people in this way or has the privilege of people coming and sharing so much of themselves. And I think as therapists, we sometimes take that for granted, all that access that we're given, right? And it certainly does feed the writing. I know that stories for me, including this most recent book that I published, actually might start in my office sometimes. Now, I'm very careful about that because confidentiality is so important as a therapist. And it's also the case that characters evolve so much when you're, or at least for me, they do when you're working on them. And stories evolve so that sometimes I've had the experience, it's a bit strange, but of finishing a whole novel and not knowing why did I start this? It's crazy. It's
Right.
impossible. But other times it's more just curiosity. What was I thinking about that sent me down this road? And sometimes I remember clearly there was one time it was a news visual, and sometimes it's something that you hear. And for me, it might be something just that I'm trying to wrap my mind around in some way. And writing about it becomes a way to think it through or make sense of it. At other times, like with the recent book, it definitely started with a person that I was working with who had a particular history and also was struggling in some pretty profound ways, just starting out in college. And so I was thinking about his history and how it was impacting his effort to make that transition away from home. Now, by the time that book got written, the young man had become a young woman and the trauma had changed. My goal was that the story not be in any way recognizable, even to the person themselves. It had to mutate an awful lot for that to happen. And after a while, the original character wasn't even in my mind. I was working with this sort of newly formed character.
Man, that is really fascinating. Your work, too, is really built on transformation, right? When we're working with clients, there is that journey, that path, that direction, and it can go a lot of different ways. And we are more a guide or an observer of their life, as much as we might want to at times completely steer them in a direction, but you get to see how different thoughts and different things can slowly or sometimes quickly change how somebody operates and how they think and view the world. And I would imagine when you're building a character, it's got to be somewhat like that, where, okay, this happens, and then somebody reevaluates or not necessarily thinking about it all the time, but it causes some disruption and they go a different direction.
With the character development, I think for me, it's a funny kind of mix of a passive and an active relationship to your character. So you might sit down and think, okay, I'm going to write this chapter and I have to figure out what's going to happen and plot it out. And some days you can do that. And other days I'll sit down and think, I just don't know. I'm waiting for the character to decide, in a sense, what they're going to do, what they want to do, who they are. So that's the more passive aspect. And I think when that's happening, it's not like you're waiting for something to be delivered to you from on high. You sense that there's some kind of a natural structure that would be a good one, that would make sense, that would be interesting, but you can't quite unearth it. And so I do put myself in a receptive, okay, I'm ready to hear what the character has to say. So in that sense, that's a little bit like being a therapist too.
Yeah, that ability to pause and let them lead.
Yes, absolutely. And other times, I think with writing, another image that I've had sometimes is of being like a forager, somebody who goes out into nature and just picks up things that are of interest. A nut, or it might be a leaf, or anything that you come across. And you just pick up the things that seem interesting or beautiful or puzzling, and then you got a basket full. And you think, at that point, okay, do I just have a basket full of random things, or is there a story here? Is this thing connected to this other thing in some way? Is there an ecology or a life here? It's another image that sometimes combines, again, that sense of being active but passive. Well,
Yeah, I like that illustration too.
that's a
Like
better word than
collecting.
passive, actually, is receptive.
Yeah, it's funny talking with you. I keep thinking of, wow, there is a lot of similarities because that is also how I get to know my clients too. It might not all make sense exactly right away. It does all come together, like in this portion, this part of your life, that part of your life. And so that does
Right.
sound really similar.
Yeah. And that same sense of not being able to, you can't force it though.
Yes. I guess I'm making an assumption here that you don't have clients that you hate.
Okay. Yeah. Pretty good assumption.
In your writing, do you ever have characters that you feel like an intense negative energy to or an intense dislike?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think so. I definitely have created characters that I think other people will, a reader might intensely dislike, and that who are in some maybe objective way
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe I did have one character who I didn't like so much. I wrote this book, which is not a published book, and I don't think it's a publishable book, but this was one book where I really understood where it started. And what had happened was I was driving and I was listening to the radio. I think it was NPR probably, and they were talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in South Africa that had been formed after the demise of apartheid, and they were asking people to come forward and to admit to crimes that had been committed in exchange, was part of this attempt to have reconciliation among factions after a period of huge turmoil. There was a Black dissident named Stephen Biko. He was very well known, very greatly admired young man, and he had been imprisoned by the apartheid regime, and he died in prison. And it was one of these deaths where people are told that it was kidney failure or was suicide, but it was pretty much known that he had been killed in prison. And at the time of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 5 people came forward and said that they had killed him. They had beaten him to death. And I was listening to this story, and it was very sad because he was a really heroic individual. But I started to wonder, who were these 5 people? What were their stories? And what had it meant to them to participate in this crime? I knew I couldn't tell that story because it was without a lot of research. It was a historical event, but I tried to make a kind of parallel story. So I created these people, one of whom I was thinking of when you said, was there somebody you didn't like? Yeah, but anyway, I wrote that. I sent it to an agent I had at the time, and she was horrified by the story. Told me I had created 5 of the most despicable characters in all of Western literature or
Whoa.
something. But when I got that, I thought that might be an accomplishment.
Yes.
So I stuck it on the internet.
Yeah, because I want to read that book now.
I
I'm really curious about it. What a great premise.
I did give it
really-
to a
yeah.
writing group that I was part of, and they had difficulty with it. It was a pretty rough story. But
Yeah.
there are people who commit heinous acts, and I'm often interested in their story. More recently, the killing of George Floyd, a man who was imprisoned for this named Derek Chauvin. And I kept watching him when I saw during the trial and just at different points and just thinking about him. How did he become this person who did this dreadful thing? And how did his life take these turns? So it's probably some innocent little boy at some point. So anyway, those stories also are interesting, but sometimes people don't like reading them or in some ways object to them being written sometimes.
Yeah, I could see that. And where somebody is also in that moment when they pick up a book too, right? Like sometimes you be open and want to be in that place. And other times, I know for me as a reader, it's, oh, I need a little of this today. I need a psychology book, or I might need something more in the romance or a murder mystery, or to be in a place of curiosity and wonder, because I think that's where a book like that is probably showcasing really your curiosity of people. But somebody else maybe comes in and sees that it has this darkness to it and freaked out by it. But I know for myself, when I've worked with individuals that other people might not want to be in a room with, you can feel that there's humanity there, and you can see their trauma and their grief and their pain throughout their lives. And it's not a one-dimensional, this person's a bad guy. It's all of these things in trying to navigate and protect themselves and trying to find strength and looking at models that might not be really connective people. So I think that's also a unique perspective, I would imagine, too, as a writer, because we are in those positions typically of seeing people differently and seeing them as more complex.
Yeah, and I think part of what you're talking about is empathy, discovering in yourself that you can sometimes easily empathize with somebody who's done some bad thing or unsuccessful life in some respects or a very rocky road. And almost always the novelist or writer's job too. It's hard to imagine writing a character where don't want the reader to feel any empathy for the character, because you can't, in a sense, you can't really receive the character or grasp them without empathy. That's the tool for bringing that character to life in yourself as a reader.
Do you ever, in your work with clients, do you ever have them read particular novels? Do you implement that into your work?
Occasionally. I have the impulse to do it probably more often than I actually do it, because I'm trying to think through. I don't want to ask somebody to, once I recommended a poem to somebody, and afterward I thought, I'm not sure that poem, it meant a lot to me, and I think it meant a lot to me as I thought about the person that I was with, but I don't think it quite connected for the person, or maybe it was too early or something. I try and be careful, but I do sometimes at least float the idea of writing. For some people, journal writing seems to be valuable in a number of ways. It can help people think things through. It's useful. You've probably seen this when people are just feeling so overwhelmed by their emotions that it lets them get them stated, and maybe they learn something when they're putting feelings into words, but then also put them aside because they've been recorded. They're not going away. You're not going to forget about them and not be able to talk to your therapist about them. They're just over there in the notebook for a few days. And some people take to it and it adds a new dimension to their life. And other people are like, maybe I'll do that.
Right.
It just didn't work for them.
Yeah. I think that it can go in lots of directions when it comes to writing. People sometimes have a block to it also. Maybe they just
Yeah.
really didn't like it or think they were good at it growing
Mhm.
up and not necessarily seen it as expression, but seen it as punitive. Of,
Yeah.
I will not yell at Bobby in class.
Write that 100 times.
Yeah.
I had somebody recently where I had talked with her about writing, and she's somebody who tends to jump in and try everything that gets mentioned. And she did start to write a lot of memoir type writing and wrote some very beautiful things and very moving. Seemed to really have a gift, involved herself in a group where there was very positive feedback, and then basically quit. And I'm thinking, wow, a natural writer.
Yeah.
But of course, it was up to her. But
And it's hard. We do have our reactions, right? That stuff still comes up for us. And how it's like, in general, I think it's one of the hardest things to experience when, and this isn't just with clients, this is with people around me. If somebody has that gift or that they have this special passion, something that they're really good at, and not moving through with at least doing it, that's probably one of the saddest things is seeing that, because that's where I think where their life force comes from. And it can be really hard when somebody has like that built-in talent.
yeah, I've seen that a lot.
Yeah.
I think I was thinking about this recent book that I wrote is about a college freshman. I have seen with a lot of college students who are coming into therapy, sometimes because they're not doing their work successfully or they have papers to write, they're not getting written, or sometimes they've even dropped out of school. Some of these young people have so many gifts. They're so smart or they're creative, but they're just not making it work. So I know that feeling of,
Yes.
why you got so much going for you, but you're going to have to do something with it. It's
Right.
not going to happen on its own. Yeah.
I know that can be a fantasy for a lot of us. Of somebody will just give me this opportunity, and then all my dreams come true. So I think that's also built into movies and where we can fantasize about that for sure. So Susan, speaking about your new book, by the way, I Love You, I want to hear a little bit more about the book, and then I would love it if you read a little bit of it as well, if you're open to it.
Sure. The book, it concerns a particular young woman going to college, but I was thinking about the fact that that is such a big transition for people. And it might not be college, it might be going to the military or just whatever takes a person away from home, usually as a young adult. And of course, people often, they'll have similar kind of hopes and dreams to each other. Everybody wants, or most everybody, to make new friends, and they want to have a certain identity, a sense of growing up now, and they explore their romantic connections. And so there's a lot of things that people have in common. Everybody also will bring with them certain baggage when they come, right? Some people have traveled pretty rough roads. In this story, it's a young woman who, her name is Leslie, the character, and her mother has died of breast cancer, not immediately before, but a couple of years before she leaves. And so when she gets to college, she's got a roommate who's got a mother who's omnipresent. She's a big force of nature. And then there's Leslie without her mother. But her mother is present in an internal way for her, of course, but she's present in some complicated ways because Leslie has a lot of questions about the relationship she had with her mother and how much her mother enjoyed her, how much they had in common, a lot of issues that a lot of people have, but in her case, the mother was absent. And then she also has a lot of questions or complicated feelings about her mother's death and her own unavailability to her mother as the mother was dying. So on the one hand, she's thinking about how much was her mother available to her as a mother, But she's also
Yeah.
thinking about the way she retreated from her mother because she was in a very kind of sassy adolescent phase as her mother was ill. So that's the start of the
Wow.
story. And the other thing I'll say about the story is
Yeah.
it has different twists and turns and lots of different characters who come into her life. It also has an environmental theme as it develops because she gets very attached to a very wild piece of land. And it turns out the land is under threat. So in a sense, the land becomes like the Mother Earth in this case, that she feels
Yes.
drawn to protect rather than she abandoning in the way she felt she abandoned her mother. I guess it's about mothering in some ways. Mother-daughter relationship. Mother.
Sounds really, yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm really excited to read it. It sounds really cool. That stage you were about that you can see happening where at the teenage state, it's all about the separation, independence, coming to your own. And I'm sure for a lot of us, that wasn't maybe our best time in relation to a parent and how that would feel if that was the last time. So, Susan, do you have a part you could read before we end?
Sure.
Awesome.
Let me know if I'm going too long, and I'll
Okay.
wrap it up.
Okay.
Leslie has gone to school. She's at the University of Michigan, but her family home is not too far from there, and she's gone home to get a favorite hoodie that she just decides she needs. It's a comfort object for her. So she's in the house with her dad and thinking back to things with her mother. He told me she was sick. So the next time she came to my door, I squinted and I gave her a hard look over. Nothing. My dad can be a drama queen, so I figured that was the point of the sickness story. Probably his way of saying, be nicer to your mother, Leslie. And yeah, she was bugging me around that time, and I was ragging on her some. But I was a teenager. What did they want from me? She called for me one night. I didn't want to go see her in her bed. It was a hospital room in there, the stale smell and clutter. But she called and called, so I had to go. I went and stood at the door, my face a gray wall. What? I asked her. I just wanted to see you. Okay, you've seen me. When I was back in my room, I replayed how she'd straightened her nightgown because it was twisted and tight around her knees. She combed back her hair with the spread fingers of both hands and tugged at the shoulder straps of her nightgown as if every minor thing was making her uncomfortable and she needed a nurse to straighten her out in the bed. That same week I learned about her cancer was the week I read about monarch butterflies. They were crashing. Millions were dying or not reproducing because there's no milkweed and they need that plant. Someone posted a picture of a monarch with half its wing eaten away. Probably it didn't have enough energy to get away from what was chasing it. It looked pitiful. The next week, I saw Mom weeding the garden. It was July, and the air felt like it could birth a thunderstorm any minute. She was wearing a blue and pink skirt and a wide-brimmed straw hat. She looked like a mother in a picture book. What are you doing? I'm weeding the garden. That's milkweed you're pulling. Don't you know that? Monarchs need milkweed. Do they need this particular plant, honey? There's a whole patch by the garage and another clump in the backyard. It's squeezing out the lovely phlox here. Have you smelled them, Les? They're heavenly. And the hydrangeas are blooming. So gorgeous. They need every plant. They don't have nearly enough. I could see her wanting to sigh because I was being so difficult, but she didn't. All right, then. I will leave it if you feel so strongly about it. It's not about how I feel. It's about reality and all the stupid people who don't care. She stood up slowly, uncramping herself because she'd been kneeling a long time. She looked like an old lady with arthritis. I guess that would include me, she said, with a tiny, sad laugh. After that, I started painting butterflies on big pieces of brown wrapping paper, all kinds and colors, not just monarchs. I got totally into it and stayed up night after night, painting them in every size. My idea was to cover my entire room, ceiling and all, in a wallpaper of butterflies. I saw a YouTube of a migration of painted lady butterflies. an endless river of them, so fucking beautiful. I wanted my room to be like that, just the opposite of the dying monarchs. It would be butterflies everywhere you looked, as if you were set down in the middle of their migration, or you were one of them, floating and flapping through the air, not a stupid human stuck in one place.
So beautiful. I want to be with all the butterflies too.
I guess we all do some of the time.
Yeah. It's so true on how a relationship can be with mother and daughter too. In that one interaction, you can see like how the back and forth can happen and what each of them might be feeling with it.
What was portrayed there was not unusual and pretty normal for a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old. But if you lose a parent at that time and that's what you're left with, you may not be able to recognize that's just part of your own normal development.
All right. Susan, thank you so much for talking with me today and reading. It was so good. And I will be posting on the show notes links to all of your information. And hopefully this will come out before Thanksgiving because there is an offer for 5 days. That book will be free on Kindle.
Yes, that's what my publisher has told me. I think right now $2.99 on Kindle, but they told me that it would be free for 5 days. And of course, you can order the paperback anytime, but that's the offer on the Kindle. I hope people will take advantage of it, get a free copy. Yeah. If you have something to say about it, good, bad, or indifferent, and you want to write a review, that would be wonderful. Appreciate it.
So thank you again so much, Susan. It was great talking with you today, and hopefully we'll talk again. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. Remember, your well-being is a priority, and we're here to help support you every step of the way. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring content on health and wellness. You can also join our Facebook group to connect with Wisconsin wellness providers by clicking the link in our show notes. Take care of yourself and remember that your well-being is a journey, not a destination. We look forward to you joining us again next time on the Wisconsin Wellness Podcast. Until then, stay well and stay inspired.